Hi, I'm Laura.
Hey, I'm Stefan, and you're listening to Attributed, a podcast library by Dreamdata.
The purpose of it is to store and share all the knowledge that we have gathered across Dreamdata employees through our LinkedIn Lives, podcasts, and webinars.
The typical topics you'll find here can be stuff like marketing,
Sales,
B2B ads,
operations,
social selling maybe.
I am so excited for the topic today. We have been working offices side by side with Michelle and Oline for so long time. Not anymore, we're very sad, but let me tell you a story why we're here, and we're gonna move over to you. So we were having lunch at the office with the ladies, as we used to take the lunches together. And we were talking about the differences between UX writing and copywriting. And they shared a document with me. So, oh, this is interesting. I've learned some stuff and I shared it on LinkedIn. And I was really surprised because the topic was so niche, but it was reshared like 20 times or so. And I was like, girls, there is a secret that LinkedIn doesn't know. So we're going to talk about that secret today. Mm-hmm. And before we go and talk about UX writing and copywriting and all that kind of stuff, I would like to hear your story. So welcome, Oline, Michelle.
Thank you.
We're very happy to have you here. Kick us off with the story of your company, Copy That, and we're going to talk about the topic right after.
Amazing. Well, first of all, thanks for having us. So you mentioned like how did this all begin and things like that. So technically, this one used to be my boss. She hired me when we were still both working at Trustpilot, and Oline was the manager of the localization and UX writing team. And she and I were essentially the only two UX writers for the entire product department there. We were responsible for all UX copy for 9 product teams at the time. And that went well, and we had a lot of success with that. And one day we sort of looked at each other and went, over dinner in Vilnius on a business trip. There's a lot of UX writing teams and a lot of UX writing that has happened in the States. It's been a thing there for the past decade, 15 years or so. There's a lot of companies that have huge in-house UX writing teams, but the European companies don't have that quite yet. They often only have one UX writer or none at all. So we kind of saw an opportunity to start our UX writing agency, Copy That, and essentially offer a freelance service for these companies that wanted to kind of dip their toe into the water and help create the foundation for UX writing in their company, and then eventually hand it over to an in-house employee.
And we did this in 2020.
Yep. Bad timing.
We told our boss, and then like a week later,
lockdown.
COVID happened, and he was like, "Are you sure you still want to do this?" We're like, "Yeah, we can do it because it's still going to be like virtual work."
And ironically enough, it ended up being somewhat of a blessing because UX writing is so tightly connected to everything digital, and companies wanting to have success digitally and creating these great experiences for consumers online. And working remotely has helped us actually get in contact with a lot of companies that we might not have been able to connect with before the pandemic. So that's how it all started.
They basically just see us as a member of their team, right? So they bring us in for the product development process. So just invite us to meetings like they would invite in a full-time UX writer.
That's perfect.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So it's worked out very well.
Mm-hmm.
You filled out a really cool niche.
We have, because we had no idea what was going to happen, right? It was somewhat of an informed gamble. But now 2 years in, we've worked with B2Cs, B2Bs, from startup to enterprise level, because every company, they try to follow a fairly similar model when they're product led, but the priorities that they have might differ somewhat from team to team. But we tend to work together with a lot of product managers, a lot of designers, engineers, but lately also a lot of people in marketing, in customer success, in support.
A lot of our time is also just spent educating, especially European tech companies, on what is UX writing and like how do you make UX writing an integrated part of your product development process, because it is still very new. UX design has been around a lot longer, so that's very established. Most tech companies have quite a few UX designers.
Right.
And sometimes they have the UX designers also doing the UX research and the UX writing, and then these people are being quite stretched thin.
Yeah.
So cool. Yeah. And we're going to dig exactly into this.
Mm-hmm.
A question, like when I knew zero about this, yes, I know who a UX designer is.
Yes.
We have one at Dreamdata. We don't have a UX writer. So can you give me an example of a copyright and a UX writing? What are those two differences? So we start with that.
So traditionally, a copywriter has a focus on selling, especially with product-led companies. They have to write copy that attracts potential customers, that drives them through the funnel, so they eventually convert. It's usually marketing, sales that has these people working in those departments.
So blog content,
is a big one.
content.
Marketing website, things like that. A UX writer sort of takes over the user once they've converted, and then it becomes all about being in the product UI. So our job is to make the product UI as clear and useful and concise as possible. You don't have a lot of noise in the product UI. You want it to be as intuitive as possible. And having something be intuitive takes a lot of hard work. You want users, we always kind of joke around and say, we have done our job if people never noticed that we were ever there. If it was so obvious and so clear that they just finished doing the task at hand. And we always say that UX writing is maybe not even half, 50% of writing. It's not about writing. It's about doing the research, figuring out what to say. It's not about the copy on the button. It's about figuring out what the button is supposed to do and if it should even be there.
Yeah.
So that's
it's a lot more UX oriented, where copywriting is more creative writing. Another way we like to sort of distinguish is like the copywriting aspect is really like giving a promise. So when you're out selling people, you're promising like this is what Dreamdata is going to deliver on. But then they start using the Dreamdata app or the online product. And are you actually delivering on that promise? That's up to the UX writer now to sort of take the baton and help onboard them and make sure that they actually that Dreamdata retains them. Because it's unfortunate, Laura, if you spend all this time bringing in the customers and then
you drop the ball.
Your UXers drop the ball. So then they stop using Dreamdata. Because the product's not good enough. Right. So it all has to work together. The journey doesn't end. This user journey that you're very focused on in Dreamdata doesn't end once they start using product. It continues and you want to keep them.
So fantastic. Then if copywriting's goal, more or less what I hear is like to bring in the client to the door, what is the goal of UX writing?
It's to keep them. You had a great post a few months ago where you talked about that people don't care about your company. They don't care about your product. And we sort of have the same mentality where once we get people in the door, we want to make sure that our product actually solves a problem for them and does so with as little effort and time as possible. We cannot assume that people are going to take the time to read everything and to put in a lot of effort to figure out how something works. It has to be clear at first glance. And that is a combination of UX design and UX writing. And UX writing is so powerful because it is the most human part of a UI. It's language. If you don't have words, you end up with shapes and colors. You end up not quite knowing where to go next, what to do.
We quite often say that we design with words.
I had a great moment actually where my dad finally figured out what I do for a living, where he wanted to order something quite expensive. And he got to the point where he had to choose a delivery method. And it said at the top, choose the day and time that suits you best. And then below it said standard delivery. That was it. And he was like, there's no time, there's no day. I don't know what to do here. And he's of an older generation. So he picked up the phone and called. He took the time. He picked up the phone and called the company and said, what do I do? And the company said, click that. And then we will contact you with options for dates and times. As a UX writer, I listened to that and I thought to myself, here's my dad who actually takes the time to call. How many users dropped off at that point? How many people went to a competitor? Why would you not take that information that you provided in the phone call, put that on the page so people know that and go, okay, and click on standard delivery and move on through the funnel and continue the sale.
Oh, this is perfect.
You can measure it. You can go to a support team and say, what parts of the product are super confusing for people? We've done that countless times where we would essentially get rid of a support ticket type completely. We had one client that had hundreds of tickets about one topic. We went into the flow, tried a few things out with text alone, and those tickets were gone. And with the money that they saved, they hired another support agent. And this is the beauty of UX writing. You can measure it. This is the difference also with a lot of copywriting, where the work that we do, we can see both in data and in user behavior that it makes a difference on the bottom line for a company. And that's huge.
Yeah, for us, support and customer success is a gold mine of information.
Yeah.
Support tickets, those are the first people that we talk to when we start working with a client. Like, what are the pain points that your users are struggling with? Because we are user-driven and data-driven, and that then leads to being revenue-driven. Because in the end, you end up with, like Michelle said, an extra headcount or increasing conversions or retention. Like, it all goes back to revenue.
So interesting, because in my head, before I learned about what you do, it was work of a UX designer.
Yeah.
It's like, well, this is their job. UX designer designs stuff so people understand what's working, what's not.
Yeah.
Talk me through about the distinction that what kind of things people are missing out if they're thinking like I used to think.
Good question.
We collaborate very closely with UX designers of the clients that we have, because we essentially sit around the same proverbial virtual table whenever we start looking at a problem that we're trying to solve for a user.
Or a new product that we're building together.
The main distinction is that we're looking at it from two different viewpoints. So a designer might not be a native speaker. There are certain cultural nuances in language that might be different. We might be able to come up with a verb that works better. And again, a lot of the work that we do is actually information architecture, where we look at a design and say, you don't need this entire text block. Remove it, make this button go down here, simplify the design. It's a very tight collaboration. Our work informs one another.
We always recommend that, or we insist on getting us involved as early on in the process, because one of the biggest mistakes that we see companies making is waiting until the very end, just before they launch, to get basically, you spent all this money bringing in a UX writer, and then you just ask them to proofread your work. No, because a lot of companies think that, they bring in the UX writer because they like the buzzword, but they don't actually know how to utilize their skills.
So when is the best timing to bring in and bring out the UX writer?
We usually come in right after discovery. So when a team has a lot of preliminary findings of user behavior,
pain points
and terminology that might be confusing, or a different feature that they either want to upgrade or create from scratch. And then Oline and I sort of look at it again from the UX writing perspective, where we essentially design with words. We sort of map out the conversation that would happen between the user and the UI, and that informs the design together with the UX designer. So we always say we can start with a draft copy. That happens as well sometimes, where the designer comes up with the text, and then we provide variations for testing. So we always say, get us after discovery, but before you test your prototype or your early wireframes with users, because talking to users as writers is a gold mine. We will often sit in usability interviews with the UX designer, but in the background, because all we're listening to is like the words that people use. Very often users will say, when you say this, do you mean, first of all, that means that it's not clear. And second of all, the user is probably using more everyday words, not jargon and internal words that you use all the time, to help inform the UI better and make it more human and less confusing.
And then we'll usually use that to come up with variations. And like Michelle said before, it's super important to repeat that UX writers spend probably 50% of their time providing UX feedback and UX rationale. So it's not just
grammar and spelling.
It's not just let's make this sound catchy and make sure that the spelling is on point.
Exactly. There's one point that I think that Nirmal pointed out very well. This is not a question. We're going to pick up questions. There are a lot of amazing questions as well. One thing you're missing to address so far is target audience. Product look and feel should be based on like who is our end user, like gender, age, region, etc. How do you work with that?
Accessibility, all of those things.
Yeah.
It's a incredibly good point. So we always say that whenever we provide variations of UX copy, we don't care what ends up being in the final product because we are not building things for ourselves.
Nice.
And UX writing is actually a really great way to find out if what is written in the product is only based on internal bias, internal understanding of a product, things like that. And that tends to happen in those interviews with users where they are unsure of what something means, if it actually is addressing their pain points. And like you mentioned, gender and age, like, is it actually written in a way that will resonate with users? Because not every company needs to sound hip and young and cool, because some things are just, a lot of people do that. They think that their product will sell better if they sound a certain way.
You're selling a banking app.
Yeah, it's okay if it's a bit boring as long as it's clear.
It needs to fit the audience.
We're talking about people's money if we're working with a banking app.
Yeah.
If we're working with insurance, it needs to be super clear what you get out of it, what you're supposed to do to get your claim, you know?
Yeah, it's okay to bring in some brand and some moments of delight into the product. But the most important thing is whoever your audience is, do they understand it? Is it clear to them?
Yeah,
and the whole market aspect, that's a good question, because localization is very important. And traditionally what most companies have done is they have English as the source language, and then they localize it. But what we're seeing now is a trend where a lot of companies that are like nationally focused, like in Denmark, there are a lot of companies that are, you know, just based in Denmark. And now you see Danish UX writers appearing. And
Nice.
So a lot of local UX writing happening, which I think is super exciting. And there's going to be more of that happening for sure.
I love that. You're spearheading it.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to take questions now. There are a lot of great ones. And then we're going to go back to our planned agenda, because you're steering the conversation. So let's answer what's interesting for you, and let's see what other questions you've got. So Lee is asking us, when working with companies, what is the biggest thing you see them missing in terms of UX writing?
The biggest thing.
Yeah, what is it that they usually miss out on?
Well, it's not just what they miss out on. I think Oline already touched upon it, is just having a very clear understanding what UX writing is. And what they are aiming to get out of it. Like we said before, if you do UX writing properly, you can actually measure the results. We always say that if you hire us, we pay for ourselves, because the changes that we make should make a difference for your bottom line and should pay for the changes that we've made. So
we've experienced sometimes with like companies bringing us in to do UX writing, but then not quite knowing or understanding the value of that and understanding how much effort goes into that. Like you actually having to put in the time with the UX research, etc.
Testing.
And then you're met with companies actually just deciding to go with copy based on their own internal opinions and biases. We like to call this HIPPO. That's not ours. We've gotten that from somewhere else. The what is it? Highest paid person's opinion. Yeah. Like that's one of those common mistakes. Like it's like, yeah, we're super user driven and product led. And then you find out that no, it's just the HIPPO who's calling the shots.
I think the most important thing, if you're thinking of bringing on a UX writer, even if it's on a freelance basis, have a very clear goal in mind. We love OKRs. We love KPIs. We always ask, what do you want to get out of this super concretely? Is it an increase in conversion? Is it an increase in retention? Do you want more people to press on this button? Do you want more people to make use of this feature? Things like that.
And if you hire a UX writer, let them do their job.
Yeah.
Don't let the HIPPO in the room.
Yes, there's a lot of opinions, and opinions are fine, but they tend to influence copy a lot because everyone can write.
Yeah, everyone's a writer.
Can speak, and it's because there's such a low threshold to being able to write words that a lot of people have an opinion on the work that you do. But like I said before, a lot of the work that we do has very little to do with the words that we use, and actually a lot more about the considerations that we have around design elements.
And also a lot of aspects related to localization and how it will translate.
If you're sitting there and you're trying to come up with a concrete way to measure success with a UX writer, you can think outside of product as well. A lot of clients that we work with have customer success managers who spend a lot of time hand-holding new clients and trying to make them use certain features. We always kind of joke that it's called customer success, not product success. So customer success, in our opinion, it should be to have the customer have success with the product and make it tailor-made to their experience. But if you have to spend hours onboarding a customer and explain every single feature, maybe there's something to be done in the product UI that the customer success manager doesn't have to do.
Yeah.
Imagine if you could free up hours of time for one customer success manager so they could do other stuff because the UI is clear.
Quite often,
Love it.
quite often we can do the smallest, we say small tweak, big impact.
Yeah.
And that's true quite
Yeah.
often. And it's not very expensive either.
No, but it can be very quickly overseen if you just sit in your corner and do that job.
Of course.
And well, suddenly the app is working a little better and customer success is doing that. So, and that was the next question from Arabelle about as well. There's a lot written down, but the most important part is at the end. How can we lead a change in mentality that UX writers are not the first ones to getting rid of?
So you need to be able to prove your value. And the way you do that is for every single project, you decide early on with the product manager and the UX designer, what is the goal of this project that you're working on? What are the success criteria so that you can measure that both qualitatively and quantitatively, because then you have numbers. Like we can sit here today and go, we actually helped a support team get an entire new headcount based on decreasing support tickets from 100 to 0 because we fixed the problem with copy. So you need to be able to prove your worth with numbers.
We did like an internal roadshow, right? Where we like made it very transparent and very clear the kind of things that we did to improve certain numbers so that other departments would know, okay, that actually improved matters. But I think what it really comes down to is leadership mentality. If leadership understands the power of UX beyond UX writing, just UX in general, if that company and leadership understands if we cut on this, we actually sabotage our own efforts. So I think that's kind of what it comes down to.
For me personally, that's why I really got into UX writing, because I came from the creative world 12 years ago.
PR.
Working in PR and agencies. And then I got this job at Trustpilot and found out that, just making something sound nice and grammatically correct and being super creative didn't always convert.
Yeah.
That was, kind of a crazy experience for me coming from a different creative world.
Yeah.
And then working with these product teams and trying out variations and testing it out. Like I get high off of it. I'm super passionate about look what I did.
Yeah. We do the exact same thing, just in very different ways. You guys are also all about proving what works and do that again and again and again and scale it. We do the exact same thing. We figure out what works, what doesn't, put that to the side, and then implement what actually works.
And then keep iterating.
Amazing. Another question. UX writing similar to UX research and interaction design?
It all goes together.
It goes together. So UX researchers are best buddies in the world, right? Because they actually provide us with the meat on the bone. They provide us with the findings that we need to, first of all, identify what certain pain points are, if things are clear to users, because once again, we have experience with a lot of different types of industries and a lot of different types of verbs and synonyms and whether or not a design element should be here or there or nowhere at all. But without a UX researcher to actually test it out and make sure it resonates, we'd also be just looking around in the dark and going, we think it works, we don't know.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying before. Of course, you can hire someone to do the UX research and the UX design and the UX writing, but that person will be stretched too thin. It's better to have people specialized in, what they're best at. And, before this call, Michelle and I were just sitting and looking at some user interviews that this amazing UX researcher had done. And this person is specialized in asking questions the right way to get the right information out of the user. And then we were just sitting there taking notes yes, this is beautiful.
Nice.
Yeah.
No, it's a partnership.
And then again, it's not a part of your job to go out and ask and to talk, and because
we can.
Yeah. There are some companies, right, where that is an integrated part of what a UX designer and a UX writer does.
And sometimes product managers as well.
Yeah. And then you have some companies that have teams of 50 UX writers, Wix, Airbnb, Netflix, all those companies.
Of course, it comes down to what can you afford? We understand that some startups can't have.
Then again, we've had some startup clients that were the best clients to have because
that's true. They got it.
They essentially were trying to just build an app for mobile where you have limited space. You want to be very clear. You don't have the budget to lose any users. So onboarding, logging in, signing up, all of those things had to be clear from go.
Well, these startups also understood the value of using UX to win and convert customers, and then be able to go to their investors and say, look what we did, look how much we have improved.
It's working.
When you have the numbers, like that's how you can often get the next investment round.
Yeah, we're all
rather
about
than
ROI.
just say, look, we launched this website, isn't it pretty?
Yeah,
But is it working?
Precisely.
Exactly.
There is a question, especially about the leadership and proof of value and
Ooh.
everything. So,
Yeah.
based on what you touched on, have you found some best practices for managing the sometimes large volume of opinions, pushbacks on the writing? Everybody can write.
Well, that's where it comes down to starting off the right way with the success criteria.
Yeah.
So always going back to reminding everyone, hey, what did we want to get out of this?
Yeah.
And are we actually achieving that? And how are we going to prove that? Well, we need to go out and test it on users. We can't just test it on the CEO.
Mm-hmm.
Who are we trying to make happy?
Yeah. I always, whenever I have a conversation with someone who has a very strong opinion on a piece of copy, and it tends to be an emotionally driven response.
Yeah.
And I always come back to them and I say, can you tell me what you are basing this on? Because I never want to assume the worst, right? I always want to assume that someone is coming to me with new information that is valuable for me to know, that I can maybe sort of, integrate into the work that I'm doing. So when you start asking those questions where you go, what are you basing it on? Can you show me some other places where you've tried this and it worked? What is your hypothesis? And then you quickly find out that a lot of it is based on internal bias and opinion, and that's fine. But then I would rather that they come out and say it, because then I can always go back and say, that's wonderful, but as you can see in this graph, we've tried that before in the past and it didn't work. And if you're really insistent on trying it out, let's test it out. Let's take these different variations and see what works.
Exactly. Like you were saying before, there's no ego in UX writing.
No.
It's about the user.
It's
So
empathy.
let's test out everything. You have a great idea, CEO, bring it on.
Yeah.
Let's test it out.
Yeah.
If your version wins, beautiful.
Cool. Yeah.
But it comes down to what works.
Yeah.
Love that. And there is a follow-up question from Arabelle on this one.
Lovely.
It's like following the full thread. So what's the right balance between data-driven decisions or launching then gathering the results?
Yeah.
Yes. Love
Well,
that.
it's important to always find that balance between the company goals and the user's needs. Because at the end of the day, you have to launch at some point, right?
Yeah.
We've had a project that was, I'm sure that a lot of people will find this very familiar sounding. We had a project that was supposed to be an MVP, was supposed to launch fast so that we could learn fast and make adjustments. And it ended up being a fully fledged product that took over a year to build.
Yeah, because it wasn't an MVP in the end.
So it's about figuring out, how much time do you have? Do you have an entire quarter to do this? Do you have a week to do this? Do you have a year to do this? Are you going to spend a lot of time up front doing research and making sure that it's as close to good as possible? Or do you want to launch fast, learn, and adjust? But pick one.
And it should be, if it's product led, it should be an iterative process. You should never be done. You're constantly improving your product. You're listening to your users. You're finding out what works, what doesn't work. So just launch it.
There's a sadly still a high number of companies that think that the launch date is a success criteria. It's live. We're done.
Yeah.
It's successful.
Yeah.
It's like,
Sometimes we'll ask, what's the goal of launching?
now the work begins, right? Like once you've launched and you see your darling out into the wild and you're like, oh God, I hope it works. If it doesn't crash, yes, that's great. But that doesn't mean that it's as successful as it could be. There might be more that you can do. And writing is a great way to do it, because there's not a lot of engineer cost and time connected to it. Copy is a great way to just tweak something and see, does that work better? Even a 5% increase is huge for some companies.
Yeah.
Yes.
A lot.
But as UX writers, we have to find that balance
Yeah.
all the time, because you have all of these internal stakeholders with their company goals. Brand is a really good example. Like UX writers and brand writers should actually work together, and quite often there's a clash.
You had the exact question.
Is there a question about brand?
Yes.
So what we always say is, what's the question?
How does UX writing and marketing brand teams work together?
Okay.
Is there an overlap?
Yes.
There absolutely is.
Yeah,
Like
there
we were
should be.
saying before, like the brand and the marketing team, they're working really hard on getting people into, like, to buy the product, right? And then the UX writers take over, but there should be a red thread. You don't want to, use the product and then it doesn't sound like the same company. And that's why the brand tone of voice is super important. But you don't want that tone of voice to take over the product, because that's a very creative, often quite emotional tone of voice. So it's okay to sprinkle some moments of delight into your product. But at the end of the day, it's supposed to be clear, concise, and useful. And the brand should not come in and take over.
I think
there needs to be a balance.
I think, like we said before, we find a lot of like golden nuggets when we speak to customer success and look at support tickets. A lot of value that we get from those conversations is listening to how customer success managers describe features and what they call them. Because if you're on a phone call with a client and you're calling a feature one thing and that client writes it down, as they do, like, oh, I'll look that up after this call. That sounds great. That's exactly what I'm looking for. And then they go into the product and it's called something else because someone in product said, this is what it should be called because reasons. The client is not going to be able to find it. And even if they do find it, there will probably be a moment of confusion because they're not sure if this is exactly what it was. So we always try to make sure that when we collaborate with marketing, with brand, that what is being used for product and feature naming is consistent across the board.
And the key there is actually work together. Have a weekly or a bi-weekly meeting where you talk about content, because you're all creating content and you should sound like the same company. You just have different goals.
And a follow-up question on that goes into UX accessibility, product accessibility, not UX. Sorry.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
So what role does UX writing play in the product accessibility?
Huge role.
Huge role.
We had a moment just a few days ago where we had to tell a client, please stop using emojis in your bullet point listings, because when you are blind and you have technology that reads text out loud for you, it reads the text of the emoji and then the actual line of the bullet point, and it is super confusing to listen to. So it will say red balloon, we just had a party, detective glasses, we're trying to find out what to do next, and it's super confusing, right?
But
so
we're also still learning this.
We
are still very
new
and just trying to learn and provide our clients with all of this important information.
Another thing with accessibility is the actual understanding of English, like the level of English that your users might have. Because yes, a lot of companies are going global or they want to conquer the American market.
Is it universal English or is it American English?
Is it
British English?
Is it British English? Is it university level English? Is it too technical? Not everyone understands everything on a certain level of English. And the nice thing about UX writing principles is that because it's all about being clear, concise, and useful, you kind of eliminate too technical terms. You make sure that it's understandable for just about everyone.
We absolutely recommend that every product team have a product UX writing style guide. So because every company has a style guide and it's usually created by the brand team to sort of walk you through the tone of voice and the colors and the logos, etc. But within product, it's very different, and you're learning all because you're testing and you're iterating. So you're getting all of these amazing findings about your users and what works. You need to document that. And when it comes to accessibility, so when you hire more UX writers, they can see, how do we write? How do we take at our company? How do we take accessibility into consideration when we are creating content within the product? Because it's so much information for one UX writer to remember, right? You need to have a style guide. And if there's more than one writer.
If you hire new writers that need to learn how it works in your product department, who's going to give them that information?
And then if you have, at Trustpilot, I had a huge localization team. I made every single one of them have a style guide as well for their language.
It's a very interesting point about localization, because there's also a question about that. If a company is going from one market to the other, trying to reach it, let's say American company going to Asia, that's the question is about. Do you have experiences of what is it that they have to make sure of that they nail right?
So there, we would definitely recommend that, like Oline mentioned before, you start off with the English source language. And one of the biggest reasons that we're doing this is that we're seeing, especially in the tech industry, a lot of these companies are multinational companies. English is the language that's being spoken. Everyone needs to understand it. But then when you break into a new market, you're going to want to look into localization. And the reason that you want to do this is because it's not a simple question of translation. It's about understanding the cultural nuance and the meaning of a language. I think we had Japanese at Trustpilot as well. And it was very, very tricky, not just in the sense of design, because that's a whole different thing. Try translating or localizing your app into Finnish. Your buttons become super long. So that's one thing. But when it comes to a culture that is maybe very, very different from yours, you want to make really sure that you're not insulting anyone.
Yeah.
You want to make really sure that there isn't any like colloquialism in your copy or any inside jokes that only work in American culture that would be offensive elsewhere.
And I don't want to break anyone's brain, but it's actually not just the words you use. Sometimes in some markets, it's also the colors.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like in some colors, might mean like elegance in one market, and another market it means death.
Yeah. Exactly. Red might be a good color instead of stop. So, but it's definitely thinking about.
You need to bring in an expert from that market
For sure.
and that person needs to, teach you about that culture and provide content for that market.
Yeah. Let's talk about revenue.
Yes,
My
please.
favorite topic.
Ours too.
Good. So
measurement.
one of the things that we put down as an agenda point is talk through how UX writing taps into revenue. How do you see this?
So we've had a few examples with clients where some of the work that we did had a profound impact on the bottom line of the company. So there would be tweaks that we made where we would see that more people would sign up, people would stay longer, people would engage more with the product. So it just had a direct impact on the actual revenue that came in.
Well, yeah. And I mean, before when we were defining the difference between copywriting and UX writing, that was the very traditional definition. But what we're seeing more and more by people requesting it is that they actually want help with their business website. So the marketing website by UX writers, because we can go in and help with the information architecture of the pricing page, for example, subscriptions, the login, as you said, making sure that the checkout flow works. So you can actually apply some of those UX writing principles that you would use in the product to your business website, even though it's officially it's on the marketing side.
Yeah.
But we get more and more requests for that. And it's actually working out quite well because it allows us to create that red thread even more.
Yeah.
It's also like levels, right? Because for us, we never just look at our slice of the pie in a company. So we define together with the UX designer, what do we want to get out of this? Then we look at the OKRs that a product manager has. Then we look at the things that customer success and support might be struggling with. And then we go all the way to the top and say, what does the CEO actually want to see at the end of the quarter, at the end of the year? What do the investors expect to see? And what part of the puzzle are we? Because it has a ripple effect.
Yeah.
Like this is the crazy part about UX writing. We think that we're sitting in a corner working on a feature, but we have a ripple effect across the entire company with just a word that we remove here or there, or something that we call something else. And all of a sudden customers are like, now I get it. Now I want to use it. Now I want to stay, extend my subscription, upgrade my plan, things like that.
Very cool. And taking your dad's example, for example, I mean, the person on the other side would not have needed to pick up the phone. Time saved there. Your dad might have dropped off. It's like he didn't.
He might have recommended it to another person if it had been a very smooth experience.
And even further,
Because again, he picked up the phone. I would have left.
Yeah, exactly.
I looked at that page and I was like, this is confusing. I'm going to look elsewhere.
Yeah.
And it's only because he comes from a different generation. And he was like, now I found this thing and I spent 2 days looking for different versions that I really want to buy. So I'll call someone because that's what he does. And I was like, I would leave, Dad. Because it's confusing and now I don't trust it anymore. And it was all these small things that led to distrust of this company. And you have to sort of sit as, a professional on your end as well, where you're like, how many points in the user journey are actually chipping away at the trust that people have?
And there are we have some examples. We can't go into like specific numbers, but there are some crazy numbers out there on like the Google Hotels. Example. I don't know if you know that one.
No,
but it's a great example of the small tweak, big impact. So they, for the longest time, had this button where do you remember what it said?
Book now.
Yeah.
You would type in the date that you wanted to book a hotel, and then it would say book
now. That was the CTA.
Yeah.
And then the Google team They tried all these different variations. And then when they changed it to
check availability,
they changed the CTA because then the users didn't have to commit.
It's
as
a
much.
mindset.
It's all like, it really comes down to psychology.
It does.
And as soon as they did that,
Yeah.
like I think it was 8% more in conversions or something.
Amazon earned
It was crazy.
Amazon earned $300 million more a year because they added checkout as guest. Because people can't be bothered to continue with an account.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
That's a UX writer who's like, we need this button because of user
Yeah.
mentality.
To the UX writers out there who want to prove value, like find some really cool examples online.
And then go to your CEO
and then go to your
say,
CEO and go, see, we could do like Amazon.
Exactly.
Let's just test out a few CTAs, see what happens.
what's the worst that could happen? You go
Yeah.
back to your draft and go back to
I think
business as usual.
Netflix has like 100 UX writers. Or
Netflix
something.
had their whole register now versus try for free for 30 days,
Uh-huh.
right? So that one was also huge. They had a lot more. Like Netflix is now going down the pipes, but back in the day, they did that test, right? And they had a lot more users sign up because there wasn't any commitment. It was the exact same functionality,
Just a CTA.
Yeah.
but it made a huge difference in signups.
It's amazing.
Small
it reminds
tweak,
me
big
of a
impact.
story
Yeah.
from Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference. And I have to tell you. So there's a
Yes.
monk going over to a priest and complaining to, no, he went over to the story's already lost. Amazing. No.
Again.
Let's go again. No. So the monk is complaining to the other monk and saying that I asked the priest if I'm allowed to smoke while I'm praying. The priest said, no. The other one says, oh, that's weird. I've asked him if I can pray while I'm smoking, and he said yes.
Mm-hmm.
So just twist it.
Yeah.
It's like, can I
Literally.
pray while I'm
Yeah,
smoking?
yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
But that's
No
the
problem.
Thing. That's the thing. It's
You
like,
didn't lead with
yeah.
the right.
yeah.
Exactly. That's
You need to
exactly
front
the
load with
same.
the value.
We always do that as well, where we like start every sentence with the most
The
important
value.
thing for the user because they're not going to read the entire sentence.
Yeah.
No one has time for that. We have a million apps on our phone. We get bombarded with
Precisely.
information all day long. No one has time for anything anymore.
No.
So it has to be super clear from go.
Last fun question.
Yes.
Unless you've got more,
These are
then
all
we're going
fun
to take
These are all
notes.
great questions.
No, but this one's actually like even more fun.
Oh,
Okay.
Now, when we're talking about all those chat AIs and
Mm.
computer writing
Oh,
shit
yeah.
for us and so
Yeah.
on,
Yeah.
can you use that for UX writing?
Ooh.
I'm very happy that you asked that because that's been going on, like it's been going
Uh-huh.
on a lot in the industry and on LinkedIn, like since last November, right? So I see a lot of, I wouldn't call it concern, but I'm seeing a lot of buzz, right? Where people are saying, oh, now we can use this to do everything. And I'm not concerned. And I'll tell you why, because I've thought about this at length. Everyone has in the UX writing field because it has an impact, right? It has to have an impact. And I thought about this and I sort of came to the following conclusion. AI is great. AI is fantastic. I have zero problem with AI. People tend to treat AI as though it's an actual human being that we have to be afraid of.
Uh-huh.
Like it's a person in the room that just came in to, steal our jobs.
It's a
That's not
tool.
it. It's a tool.
Mhm.
AI, I think, is great to help us with mundane tasks, repetitive tasks, boring tasks that are wasting our time and effort and our skill sets.
Yeah.
So I've tried some of these AIs. We know the one that we're talking about. And I think it is fantastic when it has to produce large chunks of text, when it has to produce headlines, when you want to get rid of writer's block. I don't think
Not as a
it's,
replacement tool.
not as a replacement. It can't quite do what it is that UX writers do. And I'll tell you why. UX writers work in designs that are comprised of a handful to maybe a couple dozen design elements on one screen, and then a few other screens if it's a flow. So it can probably come up with really creative ways to name a button, write a paragraph, but making sure that
Draw
it's
inspiration.
draw
anyway.
inspiration, but making sure that it's consistent across screens is going to be tricky. But the thing that I'm concerned about is not AI, but it's how we're using it.
Mhm.
Because AI is never more than the input that we as human beings put into it.
That
And-
goes back
yeah.
to the hippo, right?
Yeah.
And how they
Mhm.
decide to.
And we're seeing
work with it.
We're seeing kind of a weird trend with AI in the sense
Yeah.
that we're seeing a lot of AI being used for the creative jobs.
Uh-huh.
First with
Yeah.
illustrations, now with writing. I think it's great that we have AI. I think it just says something when people think that AI can replace creatives altogether. That is not an AI problem. That's a mentality problem. That's saying that some people, perhaps don't have a full understanding or respect for the work that certain creatives do.
It does come down to educating people on, and we've experienced that in the UX writing world so many times. People being like, "Oh, I don't need a UX writer. We just hired this student. They're a native speaker. They're good at grammar. That's good, right? That's perfect.
Good luck."
Could you imagine? Like we hear it often.
Like we said before, it comes down to not just leadership mentality, but mentality in general, and figuring out your priorities when you're working on a product or just owning a company altogether. If you want to be, we use the example all the time, a lot of companies want to be like Apple because Apple is successful and Apple is great. It's a fantastic brand. Why? Because it has great UX. The experience of using Apple products is stellar. Apple has put UX at the heart of everything that they do. So if you want to be like Apple, really be like Apple and prioritize UX.
And it's emotional, right? And it's personal. Like you can't do that with AI.
No.
You can't. You can't tell the personal Apple story.
And again, if I ask AI to come up with synonyms for a button text, I actually have to tell the AI not just synonyms for the button text, but try and figure out for me if I even need this button here.
This is very good.
Right? Because that's how I think of it. It's like I have the full picture. I try to do this exercise. I actually should document this sometime, where I try to find out how long it would take me to come up with the right things to say to get the same output as me sitting down and looking at some designs in Figma and coming up with the different output and the different designs. And the AI could not do it because it was fixated on this one piece of text. So,
and I also think like if we talk about the long form content again, because that's kind of really what's stressing people out these days, is like, aren't they just all going to sound the same at some point if they're all reproducing the same thing again and again? And what about the brand tone of voice? Like you're going to lose the personal aspect.
It's the beauty
the
of
thing that makes people want to use your company instead of the other company.
I mean, it's good for the companies that already used to do like blast cold emails to other companies. So why do you need a person doing that if you can have a computer doing exactly the same?
Then there's variation.
You didn't care about that tone of voice anyway.
But if you're, but I think if you're looking at product designs and coming up with ways that actually work for people, there's nothing more illogical than the human brain. And that's the thing. AI is sometimes simply too logical.
We'll be okay.
We're not stressed.
So
yet.
We are almost on the top of the hour. 10 minutes left.
Oh my gosh.
So we
need another hour.
We do. We're going to have another lunch, another hour and stuff like that. But Christoph, Michelle, and Oline, as a freelance copywriter, there's a comment for you. As a freelance copywriter who's being hired to do UX writing for agencies who don't yet understand that UX is more than just copywriting, how do you recommend opening up the conversation about the benefits of, I'll read that here, of
true UX writing?
True
UX writing.
You are lucky because there is now a wealth of information out there. There's a wealth of case studies out there of the value and the power of UX writing. Even just 2 years ago, there was next to nothing. It's really exploded in the past couple of years. So I would find examples.
And what we usually do with our clients is we say, when we're starting off with them, let's just do a test project. Let's agree on what is our goal and make sure it's something that's super easy to measure, very specific. And then by the end of that project, you can prove very clearly what the difference is between UX writing and copywriting. Because you probably did a lot more than just, make it sound nice and check the grammar and make sure that it was on brand. You thought about the UX rationale and looked at the UX research, and it's just a lot more layered, right? So you've hopefully been able to prove it that way.
Exactly.
What did we miss out on chatting about besides the questions that we have had? Is there anything like really important that you think, we should have spoken about this?
There's so much.
There's a lot.
Yeah, I know. By the way, everybody who is online, go and connect with the ladies on LinkedIn. And go follow the company as well.
Go check out our website so that you can learn more about UX writing. There's some sources on there as well.
I think just the most important thing is if you're planning on working with UX writers just to make sure that you actually understand their role and make sure that you make them a part of the whole product development process. Yeah. And if you do UX, actually do UX, don't just say that you're doing UX.
Yeah,
because that's a waste of everyone's time.
Crazy, maybe stupid idea. You have a checklist on your website or somewhere. It's like before hiring a UX writer.
Yeah.
What is it that you have to make sure that you've got?
So we don't, but there are checklists out there, or at least overviews of what to keep in mind when hiring or thinking of hiring a UX writer. So there's some definitions on there. There's some success criteria on there.
It's a good idea that we should put together something.
Absolutely. But it's also about like retaining that UX writer and not experiencing churn after a few months, because especially senior UX writers in the States have very clear expectations of tech companies that they work for. Yeah. And if you don't meet those expectations, then you end up losing them.
Precisely.
So absolutely.
And it's hard to hire a person like this. So it's a mutual thing. Like they might leave or you might not see the value. So you better make it work.
And 100%. Don't ask one person to do everything.
Yeah, don't group together a bunch of titles because that won't help you very much.
Yeah, and you probably wouldn't do that with other roles, right? Like to go back to the whole like anyone can write. I always joke about like you wouldn't do that to a developer, right? Like, hey Laura, Bob is sick. Can you go do some coding?
Yeah,
like you did it at university.
Could you go code for him? Like, well, I don't know how.
Yeah.
Or I wasn't trained.
And again, that tends to come down to the understanding of the role, right? Like presumably no one is doing this on purpose. They just think that it's similar enough that it can be grouped together.
Yeah.
So it's about educating yourself and getting the right person to apply for the role instead of a mishmash of things that kind of fit, but not really. You want to be successful.
And if you're dealing with investors, it also comes down to teaching them the importance of investing in UX.
That might be a nice little note to end on. Like if you're dealing with investment rounds and when to hire, like we always say, you could do it, during pre-seed, but we usually say after Series A is a really good time to get at least a freelance UX writer, even if it's just for one feature, get them involved there, see what it does, and then you can always branch out. Because again, if we do our jobs right, we pay for ourselves.
That's right. There's a final question that we missed out.
Yeah.
I think. Verena, I'm very sorry. It seems like it went through. So a lot of European companies tend to delegate localization and content adaptation tasks to UX writing teams. Do you agree with this?
I'll let you take this one.
Does he mean like that we are
UX writers are responsible for localization?
Yeah, I mean, that's basically what we did at Trustpilot,
it is.
Right?
Mm-hmm. There needs to be a clear distinction, however. So UX writers, when we did it at Trustpilot, the way that we would do it is that, yes, Oline and I were responsible for the English copy in the product. And then we would pass it on to our localization team who would localize it. And they would have us as in-house resources to reach out to and say, what do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? And we would always have multiple variations in the work that we did because not everything works in all languages. So we would have multiple versions that maybe worked better for another market. So they would always have access to that. But I think we need to be very clear that the UX writer should not be responsible for delegating localization tasks to localization managers. For that, you need a localization coordinator, because I do see this happening in companies where the UX writer also has to give things to the people who translate and localize. And all of a sudden, they're spending all of their time coordinating.
Well, also, you have all of these different product teams and product managers, and they are the experts within their area of the product. UX writers, we are like, I'm an expert on that part when I'm working on it, and then I'm moving on to the next. So really, it's the experts who should be helping the localization team as well, right? Because a UX writer, we know a lot, but we don't know as much as the product manager, for example.
Yeah.
They should be able to answer, because if they do their job right, have a lot of questions.
Love this. Everybody who were listening, asking questions, this was an amazing session. Thank you so much for engaging.
We hope you like listening to us. Subscribe to our podcast and the ones that we have been guests on.
And if you have any feedback for us, just do let us know. And should there be a guest that you think we should be talking to, then pitch us.
We're looking forward to seeing you.